this is symbolic of everything across the whole housing system. It's, symbolism over substance. And a classic example, you can see the national cabinet's 1.2 million homes proposal. Doesn't have a snowflake's chance in hell of actually happening and actually working. So basically, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, the national cabinet got together and they said, "Oh, we're going to build 1.2 million homes in 5 years to solve the housing crisis," and they're going to do it just by magically loosening planning. Now, it's never going to happen because we've got obviously higher interest rates than we've had. Like for starters, we've only ever built over 220,000 homes in a year once, and that was in I think 2016 or 2017, and we built 223,000 that year. So they want to magically build 240,000 for 5 consecutive years, which has never been done before. In a time we've got high interest rates, we've got obviously materials prices have risen by about 40% over the pandemic. We've got labour shortages, problems of land, and also it's not in developers' interest to flood the market with supply because that's working against their interests because that'll push down prices. So developers won't do it, and it also ignores the fact that that there are actually hundreds of thousands of homes that have been approved for construction, but construction is not going ahead because of those factors I just mentioned. It's not profitable for the developers. They can't get labour. The materials costs are too high, interest rates are too high, can't get financing, all that sort of stuff. So this whole notion that you can magically, relax planning and, allow developers to basically build high rise everywhere, then you're going to magically get this ginormous supply response when you've got these conditions is just laughable. And that's kind of another one of these symptoms of saying, "Oh, we're going to fix it through tokenism," on the supply side, when really the answer's on the demand side. And, in terms of don't run the biggest, you don't fix the supply problem by running the biggest and most extreme population growth in the nation's history and ramping demand. Well, that's just bonkers, stupid. But that's basically what they're doing. So it's all, forget the main issue over here and let's just focus on these little tokenistic things, which sound good, the nice little media bites, that sort of thing. But every day meanwhile, every day the housing crisis actually gets worse. And obviously, if you're an investor, well, that's good news because we're seeing property prices rebound, despite the fact that we've had interest rates go up by 4% since May last year. And even though the RBA has been on hold since June, average mortgage rates continue to rise because we've got this fixed rate mortgage reset that's going to run on for probably about another 6 months. And what that means is people are resetting from these 2% mortgages to 6% plus, and that's increasing the average mortgage rate. And despite that, prices are still rising, and obviously rents are going through ballistic as well. We've got a record tight rental market, and that's primarily because we've flooded the place with extra bodies who need housing. And it's kind of it wasn't expected by most economists except for Stephen Koukoulas that you basically get rising property prices in the face of high interest rates and lower borrowing capacity, but yet here we are, and the federal government's really to blame for it. So, this Victorian government tax, land tax hike, okay, it's good at the margin. I support it, but it's not really solving the problem, and it's just another, it's a bit of a distraction really to say, look, we're doing something about it when they're not really doing something about it. And really, if the new Premier Jacinta Allen was serious, she'd be getting on the phone to Anthony Albanese and saying, "Look, you've got to slow the migration down because we can't take this many people in the state." And so would Chris Minns in New South Wales, because those two states are taking the lion's share of the migrants, and that's what's causing the problem. And at the same time, they'd also say to Albanese that, look, for every migrant that lands in our state, you must give us $100,000 to help pay for the infrastructure, because the whole problem, I think I said this last time I was on, or one of the other times, the reason why I've got these weird settings whereby the federal government keeps pumping in all these migrants is because they get most of the gains from immigration, because the feds collect 80% of the tax revenue and the states and local governments only collect 20%. So you got this kind of misalignment of incentives where the federal government gets all the gains from immigration through personal income taxes and company taxes. So they want to keep running it really hard, whereas all the costs fall on the states, and then they end up falling on us because the states can't afford it. So what they end up doing is selling off all the assets, and then you end up paying private taxes, is what I call them, like toll roads fees and all this other stuff, to privatise entities. And it's all basically been done to try and keep up with this mass population growth. So, every time you bring in 1 million extra people, you got to build all these hospitals, schools, public transport, roads, etc. And they end up selling off all this stuff to try and get some money, quick money in the door. And then you end up just paying user fees, which are way higher than what you would have paid otherwise. And the close example, I always use Sydney as an example. In 2000, around about time of the Olympics, when Sydney had about 3.8 million people, they had about 2 toll roads. So they had the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I think the tunnel might have been built then, but basically if you cross the bridge, you paid a toll, and then there was one near the airport. Now they've got about 20. And that's because they've just basically had to build all these toll roads everywhere to try and keep pace with this mass population growth they've had. Toll roads are incredibly expensive. You've got to build tunnels and all that sort of stuff. So it costs a whole lot of money. You've got to reclaim land because it's already built out. So now if you want to drive around Sydney, you've got more congestion than you had 20 years ago, despite the fact they built all this stuff. And you get basically Transurban reaching into your pocket, pulling out a $20 note anytime you try and drive anywhere because you've got to pay tolls, whereas 20 years ago you didn't. And this is all because we've been running this ridiculous immigration program, which we didn't need to run. And it's basically made everyone's life worse. Like some immigration, it's a bit like salt. Some immigration is good and it makes the dish taste better. But if you have too much, it tastes bad. And if you have way too much, like we do at the moment, it becomes toxic. It can actually kill you. And that's sort of where we're at now. And I guarantee you the next stage we're going to have is we're going to have a water crisis, because 4 years ago, the nation obviously had a long drought and Sydney's water supply was down to 20%. What's going to happen next time we have a drought, and which is supposedly coming, and we've got literally millions more people in the country to provide water to. The solution then will be to build more desalination plants everywhere, which will push up everyone's average water cost. And then you got the problem of how do you get the water from, say, the coast in Sydney to Western Sydney, where a lot of the migrants are going, which is 30 to 50 kilometres away. You've got to somehow pipe it uphill. You've got to build the pipelines. You've got to then pipe it against gravity, which takes a lot of power to pump it to these western suburbs areas. And I think water is going to be the next sort of crisis for this country, because we just don't have the natural water supply to support all these people. And then, but that's the path that's laid us on, housing crisis, water crisis, lack of hospitals, schools, infrastructure, everything. And it all can be unavoided. It could all be avoided by by good policy in the federal government not running the most extreme immigration policy in the nation's history.